What's wrong with the boomers, Mark?
Everything.
Begin at the beginning.
So imagine it's 1968. You get to go to the University of California, Berkeley for a couple of $100 a quarter. You get the greatest minds of the post-World War II generation, which have fled Europe and made home in California. You get to live in the summer of love before there's AIDS or even herpes to live about. You get to be a hippie. And then in the 70s, you have to get real. So you start to accumulate assets. There's a lot of inflation. It means your nominal wage is going up, your real wage is going down. But if you buy debt instruments, it means that the holder of the creditor on the other side, is eating it because of inflation. So hence, boomers have big houses, as we said before, right? So then you get to the 1980s. And then in the 1980s, you'd say, oh, this is too much. We've got to change it up. So along comes Reagan, a guy who was totally wrong in the 70s and totally right by the 80s. The whole world moved to his preferences. It's a brilliant book on this called The Invisible Bridge by Perlstein.
Yeah, Rick Perlstein.
Fantastic book. And what he just shows is how you got to 1969, like Reagan was this freak, this weirdo who was concerned with stuff that nobody gave a damn about. And then the 70s were such a crazy decade that by the time that you get there, basically everyone's come to him and his preferences. So you get the reset. You get Thatcher's the same thing. So you basically stop worrying about full employment. It's all about inflation control. You got to cut down public spending. You go to war with the unions. You do all this sort of stuff. You liberalize, you globalize, you integrate, you privatize. That's the mantra. And basically you start to get this huge set of returns going to the top 20%, particularly the 1%. But that's boomers, because by that point they're in their 40s. And the other people who are voting for this, because they've got assets, they don't want to have high inflation eating away their savings anymore. They want to lock in those real interest rates. So they do. They ride this out all the way. And you have this bull market that goes from 1987 in stocks all the way to 2007. You've got a 401k. Fantastic. Now, Trump was out the other day going, look at the stock market, 401k, everybody's doing great. Last time I checked the numbers, only 22% of American firms offer 401ks. And half of all 401ks have no money in them. So once again, what that means is, on average, Americans have, I think, $36,000 in the 401k. No. It means a whole bunch of people, like 10%, have $360,000, and a huge amount of people have absolutely nothing and are barely, they've got Social Security and that's it. And guess what? Ryan, that piece of Ryan, is already, as you know, this is the danger of the tax cuts, right? We do the tax cuts, we'll have a deficit. Oh, look at that deficit. We need to cut Social Security. That man's so ridiculous. But anyway, to go back, continuing with the boomers, by the time you get to the 1990s, they're in their 50s. They've paid off their mortgages. They can sort of send their kids to college because college tuition hasn't gone through the roof yet. What's there not to like? They vote for Bill. They vote for Hillary. It's great. Then you get to 2007. Boom, the whole world goes down. Guess who you've got to bail out? You've got to bail out the banks. Why have you got to bail out the banks? Well, here's the thing about banks. Assets and liabilities for a bank are different from you and me. My asset is my condo in Boston. That's the bank's liability because they don't want to own a condo. They want the income from the mortgage. So their asset is my liability, vice versa, and it all sums to zero. When you look at it that way, when you bail the banks, you're bailing out the assets and incomes of the top 20%, which would be particularly the top 20% of boomers, which would be particularly those who own 64% of everything. So they're not awful in the sense that they're awful people. They're just following the incentives that have been laid out to them in a free market system to accumulate as much assets as possible and leave it to their kids, which means they hate inheritance taxes, they want to pay low marginal rates, and they continually vote down things like bonds for schools, bonds for subways, Boston, etc., etc. So, you know, they're acting in a completely understandable way, which for them is individually rational, but it's just really crap for everybody else who come in behind them who can't accumulate assets in the same way precisely because they've done that.